Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of Trekprime. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that I've been thinking of, and I really didn't have a good idea for the title of this because it's actually kind of all-encompassing, but I wanted to break down this big topic, and it's a rabbit hole. But Jeff over here recommended that we actually condense it down to the two of us. And the subject matter could basically be boiled down to Star Trek. What is it to us? Just the two of us. I can't speak, and Jeff obviously can't speak for every fan around, every Trekker, every Trekkie. I don't know what the term, there may be other terms now for it, but people who are into Star Trek, there's a lot of identifications that are unique and different, but I wanted to talk about us and our particular interest in Star Trek. And the first topic I wanted to bring up in this, and by the way, Jeff, I'm sorry, I usually introduce you. This is Jeff, of course, and I'm Andre. I think if you've been watching, you probably all know our names by now, but I hope so. But the first question I have, and I wanted to ask you this, and I'm not even sure knowing you, if I even know the answer to this all the way. What was it, or who was it, that first got you into Star Trek?
Well, that's going way back to my time in first grade. And I have bits and pieces of memories of it, but I do remember there was a teacher that I had. Her name was Miss Walker, and I was living in Florida at the time. And I wasn't really, I've seen Star Trek when I would flip the channels, but I wasn't really watching it. The thing I was into was there was this Japanese show that used to come on called Gold On. I don't know if anybody even remembers that, but
It's like Ultraman kind of thing?
Well, what it was this giant gold robot, and he would transform into a rocket, and he'd fly around and fight big creatures like Godzilla creatures and stuff.
We don't see that anymore on TV, do we? Those Japanese robot kind of shows. Well, we have Power Rangers. That's about as close as we get, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it was campy, but it was for a little kid that my age at that time.
Yeah.
I know.
It's cool because you're not critical. You're just enjoying all this flashing light and flying around and.
Yeah, right. That's what it was. And so, anyway, this teacher, she had this thing where she was going to, for science, she was asking us questions, and if we got our answers right, she'd give us a Star Trek Delta Shield badge that they would wear on their uniforms. I really didn't recognize what it was because, like I said, I didn't really pay much attention to Star Trek at the time. So she... those kids that were, she'd ask questions like, how many times does the Earth have to turn around to make a day and all that, like basic questions, for kids and stuff like that. So, I was watching her passing these things out. So I was like, I was wondering why everybody was so excited, about getting one of those things. So I decided to go home and actually sit down and actually watch it. And the first episode that I tuned into that had come on was the Doomsday Machine.
Oh, wow. So,
yeah, that was the first one.
What way to get into it. You're getting into some deep Star Trek stuff there. You've got, characters, and you've got a high-tense situation and some of Kirk's background and a genuine threat to the entire galaxy, this thing that can eat planets. You started with a big one. Wow.
Yeah, I know. That was the first one I actually sat through and watched the whole thing. And I liked it. So, after a while, I started to make a habit of watching and watching more of it. And then I just kind of got hooked on it. And so I would tell the teacher that had was passing out those badges, that I asked her where she got them. And she had said she ordered them from some catalog. And I don't even remember what the name of the catalog was. But they were like just regular patches that you would buy in a store if you're making your own costume, and you just sew them on there. And she just bought just the patches, and she got like a whole bunch of them and stuff like that because they weren't that expensive. So and I was telling her I was watching it and everything, and she said, oh, well, that's good. She goes I was watching that when she was younger, back in the 60s. She was watching that when she was in college, being a teen, being to be a teacher. I was like, wow. So anyway, yeah. So over the years, I mean, I was just watching the reruns during the '70s all the time, and um, as far as how it impacted me with other people my age, as I got older and started to get into the higher grades in school, I noticed there were more kids that I was running into that were watching it, and that gave me something in common to talk to them about, because otherwise I really didn't have anything to say, because I moved around a lot growing up, and so I had to kind of start over every time I was put into a new school to try to find some common ground with kids. And I was sort of shy, and I wouldn't really say much, and I just kind of hide, and I would do that for like months. And then if I hear somebody like say anything about Star Trek, I'd kind of get involved in the conversation and stuff. And that was sort of how I started to make my friends that way. And so when I got into junior high, when I moved up here to Maine and everything, and I was like, meeting friends that were really getting into it, because at that time people were getting into the role playing Star Trek games. So these people were like very, very heavy into it. I mean, they knew details about it that I didn't know. So I kind of learned from them all these things about Star Trek that I didn't know. Technical manuals, the different ships, the different characters, and what they can do in these different worlds and stuff like that. And they got me hooked into the game. So that just amplified my interest in Star Trek. And it carried over into high school. And when I got into high school, that's when Star Trek: The Next Generation started in. And so, what I'm saying, everything just kind of momentum just kind of built up. Even when I went into the military, there were people in there that knew Star Trek, but there was also other people that were interested in things like Robotech, which was an anime show that used to come on in the '80s. That was pretty interesting. Was from Japan.
Yeah, I know about it. They didn't they release Robotech on these little mini DVDs at one point? It was like a specialized kind of thing.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was a cartoon. Yeah, but it was pretty interesting.
Anime, yeah.
But I met people in the military who didn't know anything about Star Trek, and I introduced them to Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they got hooked right off. And after a while, we used to have these weekend meetings about Star Trek, and I was basically trying to, educate them basically about the characters and stuff like that. And then we would just have like these little club meetings on the weekends about Star Trek. Because my mother, I was in Germany, and my mother would tape the episodes for me, and then she'd send the tapes to me, and then we'd play them in the day room on the VCR. We'd all be in there watching them for the first time, because we hadn't seen them. They didn't play Star Trek in Germany on our American station. I mean, they were playing it in German, but I didn't understand German, so I couldn't,
Because they dub it in, right?
Yeah, so we had to, we didn't get it on our AFN station, which was just for, American Armed Forces Network. So we had to get that stuff, sent to us by our, people back home. So my mother would record them, and we'd watch them there. But yeah, a lot of people, they really got hooked onto it. And after that, then they started to get interested in the TOS era and then the movies. And before you know it, they just became Star Trek fans. So, it's interesting, how I saw that, progress over the years, in me, and how it influenced other people really quick, when they got hooked on it.
Right, because that's how certain levels of fandom work. It's a word of mouth thing.
Yeah.
You get to know people, and some people say, you like the Patriots, and you were saying, do you like Star Trek? I mean, that was, people have different ways they interact, and Star Trek, you were rooting for the team, and that was your thing, and they were like trying to say, oh, here's what's appealing about this, and here's what I like about that, and it starts out from. So, was that your basic idea of how you got into it?
Yeah, it's essentially how it really got me into it, right up until I got in the military, and I was watching it. I think Deep Space Nine didn't really start until after I finished my first 4 years in the Air Force, and when I got out, that's when Deep Space Nine started.
It was 93, yeah, January 93. And then,
Yeah.
of course, I have a little memory. We met, you and I, the second year of Star Trek Voyager. And, I can't remember the name of the episode for the life of me, but for some reason we had a VCR that didn't work. And I remember that there was an episode, I'm not sure, maybe you know the name of it, where Neelix is putting himself in charge of this investigation of this crew member who is going out and sending secret information to the Kazon.
Oh, yeah, I remember that episode. I can't remember the name either.
Right, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But Neelix had that cooking show, remember?
Yeah.
And he was having...
and I remember how I was laughing at how he was running that. I mean, I thought that was neat. I wish they'd have kept that on there,
That Cleveland Neelix or whatever it was, the Good Morning Voyager program. like Neelix's talk show,
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a cool idea.
Him being kind of Kathy Lee or whatever, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was sort of like the gossip thing of the ship,
right. We have these upcoming meals, and this crewman in blue is seeing this person. We're gonna have somebody come on, but he decided that he was. And what happened, if I remember, is that Harry Kim wanted him to go Geraldo and do investigative journalism, and that's how he caught the guy. But I remember when we first met, that was the episode that we were really. And also it was around the time they were doing that thing on Deep Space Nine where the changelings were infiltrating Earth and there was this conspiracy. It was around that time. So that we were kind of up in that period. Now, as far as how I got first into Star Trek, it may have been there from the beginning. I mean, to be honest, when I was younger, one of my little childhood stuffed animals was this Star Trek the Motion Picture Spock stuffed doll. But it was interesting. It had a plastic head. It was kind of like a dog toy, and the body was kind of fleece. And I don't know if you remember these. Kirk
one. It's all Velcro hands.
Yeah, Velcro hands. They go together.
Oh yeah, I got that in Kirk too. I got both.
Yeah, I didn't get the Kirk one. Yeah, it was the Spock, and as they say in that book, The Velveteen Rabbit, I loved all the stuff off. I mean, I used to hug that so much. I loved the little belt thing off, so I was like half there now. But you could tell I like that doll. I like that. So Spock was always there. He was always there. So Spock was always there with me. Yeah. So then, when I got older, I started looking at this guy with a pointed ears who was very stoic and serious, and I said, "So, who is this guy from?" When I was 6, isn't it weird how memory works? You can forget what you ate for. You can forget a meeting or something yesterday, but you remember details from years ago. It's almost. I know. And so, my mother was cleaning out our bathroom in our old house, apartment we used to rent out, and I remember the bathroom was the tub was dark olive green. It's the only bathroom I've ever had that was like that dark hunter. It was an odd color for a bathroom, but anyway, she was cleaning it out, and I was like, "Oh, Mommy, what's this Star Trek thing? What this? You watch this thing every day at 4:00. It comes on." And in those days, we used to have, I think it was through Channel 56, and after Star Trek, they always had this guy come on, and he'd say, "Oh, in this episode of Star Trek, this and this happened, and this actor was in this show." I don't know if whether they have like an explanation. I remember one of them, they mentioned, I think it was the one about Lucira. Was that Lee Merriweather was in there? I think it was Lee Merriweather. But whatever, they were saying, "Oh, well, she was in Barnaby Jones," or whatever, and they would describe it. And I'd say, okay, this Star Trek is a big deal. I'm 6 years old. So my mother gave me this very vague description. She said, well, they say it in the theme. They're people going out where no one's gone before, and all these different things were kind of above my head. And the first episode I watched was not the Doomsday Machine, but I still enjoyed it. And I know it's not probably a fan favorite. And it was kind of convenient because I was the right age for it, although probably if I conceptualized it, it probably wouldn't have been very positive in a way. But it was an episode called "And the Children Shall Lead." This Gorgon creature manipulates these children whose parents have just been killed into being bad seeds and causing the ship to go off course. But it was kind of children themed, although in a really dark, kind of Carrie way. But I
Yeah.
remember my first exposure to it was that way. And then what happened is that I ended up getting the flu when I was 6 years old. And my mother at that time, she had seen every Star Trek movie in the theater except The Wrath of Khans. So we went out and got that. I was allowed to see it. And, in those days, I don't know how it was with you, if there was a scene of an explosion come off, my parents would, cover my eyes. So anyway,
Yeah.
so I saw it, but I said, oh, this Khan, where is he from? So um, um, a chiropractor my father was going to had cable, and um, he had Space Seed, and he dubbed it from one VCR tape to another. You know how they used to hook them up and do that?
Yeah.
He had a machine that did that. And when I was sick with the flu, I watched this Space Seed when I was about 8. So that was the first episode of Star Trek I really saw, and he stuck cat's paw on it. So by that point, I was starting to get the rhythm of the show, and I was watching just Transformers or whatever was on at that time. Pee Wee Herman. I guess so. I'm going from that to Star Trek. I mean, and I conceptualize that leap. Pee Wee Herman to Star Trek. Strange mix. But anyway, so the thing is,
you seem too intelligent though for a Pee Wee Herman kind of guy.
well, like I said, but again, my whole thing was that there's nothing like this wacky guy on TV, and there's nothing like this. I mean, now at that time they had the repeats of the '70s Buck Rogers on too. I don't even remember the '70s Buck Rogers. And even at that age, I was like, well, I kind of know I'm watching a TV show with this. I don't know why. I just kind of know I was watching a TV show. Somehow I knew. It felt very TV show-ish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, my 6-year-old mind was like, it's like I'm watching a stage kind of thing. So anyway, when Star Trek came on, I mean, now people, have their issues with the special effects and everything, but it felt kind of real to me at 6. It felt like this could be a window to the future. So, and a couple of years ago, I don't know if I told you this, actually a few years ago, I went to a sci-fi convention in Bangor here, where they had Nichelle Nichols, who remembered the convention in '91, and my mother being the only person who mentioned her singing career and asked her to sing, and she remembered that. And now I believe she has dementia, so I'm glad that was something she could carry over. I'm glad that she remembered my mother asking the question that wasn't about the matter, antimatter, whatever it is that she doesn't know. The one fan that asked her about her, and we talked to her. And I talked to Denise Crosby, who was also there, and I told her this. I didn't have the money for an autograph or a picture. So I told Denise, I said, and this I'm going to tell you here. When Star Trek The Next Generation came out, my parents rented Star Trek 4, and they didn't cover my eyes for that one. I love that movie, but if you remember the VHS, it had that commercial at the beginning for Star Trek The Next Generation where it described every character. Remember? Yeah. Geordi, a man with unique vision.
Yeah.
Or Klingon Officer Worf. Remember Klingon Officer Worf? He's not an officer, he's Klingon Officer.
Yeah.
There's a position on the Enterprise, a Klingon Officer. So, anyway.
Yeah, like we don't know what a Klingon looks like. They have to spell
Klingon Officer. Like Vulcan Officer or whatever. So, okay, so they're being that way about it. But anyway, so I just remember a Klingon. They're supposed to be bad guys. They're on this ship. Krug's the blind guy on this ship. And there's female doctors and there's this telepath. This is going to be a cool show. And they got these colorful outfits on. The ship is all lit up and it's all fancy and new. So, as I told Denise Crosby, I was supposed to go to bed at a certain time, like children are, and I said to my parents, this is what they call it, I'd say, I'd like an exception. I want to see this show, this encounter at Far Point. They said, we'll give you that time. And it was a school night.
Yeah.
So I stayed up and I watched the show. And, people criticize Far Point now, but, I'm 8, Q appearing on the ship, and the trial, and these jellyfish things at the end. And I'm so excited. I go to sleep. It was a long night. And I woke up the next morning and I went to school. I was in first grade. Everybody was talking about this show. Teachers all hated it. They love Kirk. They all hated it. They said, oh, there's only one Star Trek, and it has to have William Shatner and James T. Kirk and Mr. Spock. But the kids were like, but this is a new thing. They got all these new characters, and they're there, but they're in the past. And they even had Bones up there as an old man. So this is like, we're talking about, how do you add 6 and 3, but then Star Trek The Next Generation at recess, and are there going to be toys out? So that was like a big thing. So like, kind of similar to you, I felt like this was the first time I could really interact with a lot of young people. And, I mean, here's the weird thing about Star Trek The Next Generation. I didn't see a lot of its first season of its original run. I watched it later when they started putting it into syndication toward the last seasons of the show. I didn't see The Naked Now until 1993. I didn't see Code of Honor until 1993. I didn't see The Neutral Zone until 1994. Second season, spotty. I didn't start watching the show Sunday until, and remember, I don't know how it was where you were, but the first season of TNG here was a Saturday night show. Like Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine was always Saturday here. I don't know how. I think it was here. You were here at that when Deep Space Nine was on. That was Saturday most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, it was on the weekend, I think. Yeah.
Because usually Sunday night at 6. I remember, and my parents would all watch with me. My mother, my father. Usually during dinner, we watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, and a show called Life Goes On with Kelly Martin. We'd always watch those two because they'd be on right after each other. So we watched those, but always Star Trek: The Next Generation. Toward the end of the show, they started switching seasons around, but in terms of what time it was going to be on. But even if Next Generation was on, I think the episodes before All Good Things were on at Wednesday afternoon at 4. They were on some, but like Preemptive Strike or whatever. But I always found time to see it, or if a game preempted it, I always catch it sometime. And one thing, and this is just a memory of one thing that really got me into watching it. I think this is what got me watching it fully. I was catching it in season 3. I didn't see all of season 3 in its run either. When they had the best of both worlds. When he came out and said, I'm Locutus of Borg, Riker's Fire, to be continued. That summer, my friend Joseph and I, who's a major Star Trek fan, is Picard going to come back? That was the whole summer thing. We were inventing scenarios. Is Riker going to fire on him? This was like, we were almost like role-playing game right there. And, just to be joking about it, I used to be Riker. We'd play, We were 10 years old. I was Riker. And I'd be like, fire. Joseph, Locutus. We do this. We were all wrong with our ideas. But from then on, I just kept going. Because that was the first cliffhanger they had. So I guess it kind of hooked me in fully through that. I was watching it. I liked it. But it hooked me with that cliffhanger. I was like, I want to know what's going to happen. So even though The Best of Both Worlds is often said, it's a great first episode, second one, I keep going back to both because that's when I started watching every week.
Yeah.
Because it was like, that's where it's like, okay, I got to pay attention to this. This is getting significant now. This is asking big questions. I'm asking big questions. So that's how I got into Star Trek. Actually kind of similar to you, only a little more family-oriented because, it built up. Although your mother taped the shows for you, I'd tape them with her, and we'd do that little thing where you take commercials out.
Yep.
My goodness. Ages ago, isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, I still have a VCR.
Oh, no kidding. I still have things I have to watch on VCR, too. I get rid of most of mine when I get DVDs. But, honestly, I see YouTube videos where kids are saying about 5, what are these things? And I'm realizing, the parents are my age. So, but yeah, I'm a VHS kid if there ever was.
I had so many tapes of Star Trek, that, I'm stuck with them all. I mean, I can't play them.
I had boxes, and I got rid of the tapes, and I'll tell you why I got rid of the tapes, because my mother would mix things. The tapes weren't expensive, but it would be Star Trek, and then the Flying Pigs of Galapagos or whatever she was watching, and then something else, and then another Star Trek, and then maybe a bit of Star Trek here, a bit there. On DVDs, you don't get that stuff, so
They had a way that you could transfer what's on the tape onto a DVD. That would eliminate the need to have the VCR around to play all these tapes that people are still buying, by the way, because if you go to Bull Moose or you go to Goodwill, you're going to see rows and rows of VCR tapes. Now, these people are buying these things.
Yeah, and when I go to Goodwill a lot, you know what I see? I see a lot of those Time Life Star Trek tapes. Like, I think it was Time Life that did it, or was it Columbia House?
Or Columbia House, yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
Columbia House, yeah, and they'd have the. I think they did original. They did the TOS. They did. Did they do TOS? Because I know that Paramount was putting them out too.
Yeah, they did.
They did TOS, and I think wasn't it like 2 per tape?
2 episodes, yeah, 2 episodes of tape, yeah.
And
so
then
that was a lot. That was a lot of tapes.
did Next Gen do that too? Because I know the Counter Farpoint was one whole one because it was a 2-hour story. So
yeah,
and or they do the cliffhangers on like they do Best of Both Worlds on one or whatever. And didn't Deep Space Nine and Voyager get to do that too?
Yeah, I think Deep Space Nine had Columbia House tapes. I don't know about Voyager, but
I had some Voyagers. I had some Voyagers. I don't know how far they went with it because they had VHS in '99, in 2000. So in 2000, because the one I had, I remember I had Scorpion, Part 2, and The Gift. They put the two together. Yeah. I don't know why they put the Scorpion and The Gift together, but it was weird the way I had. Maybe it was a defect. I don't know.
You know what it is? Actually, the three, it's a Scorpion and Part 2 and The Gift are almost like one episode because if you watch it, The Gift is almost a direct pickup of after the end of the second part of that.
That's funny. The first Scorpion, even though it's a cliffhanger technically, the first Scorpion is almost its own story.
Yeah.
Because if you notice, if you go on Scorpion Part 2, Jeremy Ryan's in the credits by then.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lean, whatever. I can never quite get her name correctly. Cass. Her name was still in the credits on Scorpion 1, but they took her right out with the second one. And she was a special guest star on that and The Gift. So I guess it can make sense that Scorpion 2 and The Gift will be put together like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of how I got into Star Trek directly. Now, this is possibly a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I'll start with you because mine is pretty elaborate, but could be with both of us. How has Star Trek impacted your life over the years?
Well, that's a big question.
I can't make it any less bigger than that.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was younger, when I was, before, in elementary school and stuff like that, Star Trek was like something that, I would just pester everybody with because, I used to have Legos and stuff, and I'd build communicators and phasers and stuff like that.
I totally do that, yeah.
I used to bring them to school, and, I'd be chasing people, the other kids around in the hallways and stuff, zapping them and stuff like that. And I remember one of them slapped it out of my hand and it hit the wall and it shattered all over the floor.
Like the face.
I learned at that point that the next time I build one of these things, I'm going to super glue it.
Oh,
so that way,
Legos, huh?
So I had this permanent, phaser and permanent communicator, that it did flip. That was the only part that would come off, but that sucker was solid like a rock.
Yeah, so it wouldn't go. It reminded me of the episode of Star Trek Frame of Mind where everything shattered to pieces because it was all a program. Like
yeah.
But like I said, man, I remember scanning a few of my teachers with my fake tricorder.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? I'm saying I'm checking for vital signs or whatever, But they didn't snap it out of my hand.
And this was before, Next Generation came out and they started making toys. So I started making my own stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into the crafts. I mean, if it wasn't for Star Trek, I wouldn't be like building my own model spaceships.
Which we're going to be talking about after the show. So it started the hobby of craft with you, which it did for me too. I don't know if I told you this, but my grandfather, he had one of those. A great grandfather. He used to go to Brooks or Welby's, and he used to buy for like $25 those little 9-inch black and white TVs, and the only remote they had was a little thing that squeaked.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It would go beep, beep, beep. It was like a little. It looked like the Star Trek 3 Phaser 1.
Yeah.
So here's what I did with that. I slapped a little piece of paper on it, and I made that into a TOS Phaser 1. But when you went on it, it wouldn't go phaser. It would go beep, beep, beep. It would squeak. Like, if I Chekhov's little phaser in Star Trek 4, I'm very sorry, but beep, beep, beep. Like Chekhov's face, like when he's trying to stun him with that communicator. It was
Yeah.
neat. It would like this
No,
is very
we got
intuitive.
ambitious once. My first Star Trek uniform, I didn't know how to sew, so I made a Star Trek: The Next Generation uniform using a glue gun and felt.
Oh
What I
wow!
did
Just
is
glue the
I
material
bought
together.
I bought a red sweatshirt, and with that red sweatshirt, I put the black shoulder, the patches, everything that was black. I put it in there with felt, and I used the glue gun to make it. That was the first time I ever made anything like that because I didn't know how to sew. You know,
Yeah, I
and it
remember.
held up for years. I mean, it just it wouldn't fall apart.
I remember the first Star Trek tricorder I made. That wasn't Lego. I took a bunch
Yeah,
of cardboard. What I did is I used tracing paper to trace out the picture in the old technical manual. I put it on cardboard. I wrapped it all up with masking tape, filled it with tissue paper, put twist ties to make the hinge, drew in all the controls, and then painted it gray with marker.
yeah,
Somehow it was supposed to do something. It didn't do anything. It just was it looked like a hunk of junk, really, but it was a fictive tricorder. So I was happy when the Playmate one came out, and then I ruined it by putting Sharpie pen on it for some reason. But anyway, the point is that it was there. But yeah, so it inspired your crafting interest, and it did mine too.
yeah.
And also, is that the main way it impacted on you?
Yeah, that would be the big way it did. Um, honestly, the other way that it did is when I got older, I started to see the subtleties of Star Trek's the stories, started to pick up what they were talking about. Stop looking at it as just action adventure, and started listening to the message. Because every time you'd watch it, you'd learn something different. And as you get older, then you start seeing what the writers were trying to convey on the audience
Right.
through these.
One YouTuber said it well that each Star Trek episode, as they were talking about, contemporary Star Trek, which we're not talking about. We're talking about Star Trek Prime. Um, you know, he was saying that every episode of Star Trek contained a lesson. Every
Yeah,
planet contained a lesson. Every ship contained a lesson. And when you said that, that reminded me of that.
yeah,
That, whether you're young or old, you shouldn't stop learning. So,
yeah.
yeah. And I had the same experience. This is kind of a personal thing, but when I was 11 or 12 years old, let's just put it this way. I started to become aware that racially, I was not like the other children around me. My parents were different. My upbringing was different. We talked about different things than some of the other children. And when I was younger, it's like, oh, you want to belong. But as I got to be 10, 11 years old, I started to have more esoteric feelings about it. And at that very same time, Commander Data on Star Trek The Next Generation is doing the same thing. So oftentimes, I would look at Data and say, okay, he's approaching this in a good way, but he did that in a bad way. Like, for example, I learned how not to deal with people when they're getting married from Data. Because,
Yeah.
Keiko has formulated an idea that will make you both happy. She's canceling the wedding. I learned through Data's experience as a young person growing up, and also the fact that, seeing him experience things on the ship that, like, even Measure of Man, like, he's different than them, but, him talking to, about data lore, him talking to Picard, and Picard calling lore it, and Data saying, I notice you two use the term it, implying I do too qualify as a thing. And I was never called it, but like I said, and I mean, it's not a big deal, but when I was younger, a lot of grown adults used to call me Andre. And it's just, Andre is just kind of a French name, and, it was always pronounced in a kind of disrespectful way, and that's how I kind of defended myself. It's Andre, Mr. whoever it was. And nobody ever gave me a problem with it, but I learned my dignity through Picard and my curiosity through Data. And, seeing the situations they went through and how they paralleled real life, I think Star Trek impacted me on my life in one way. A lot of people today, I don't know if you hear this, are always saying to you that, well, to me, that, oh, don't think about the past, don't worry about the future, keep in the now, in the moment all the time. And watching Star Trek, I realized that there's a reason why they call it the space-time continuum. It's
Yeah.
a huge continuum. What we do in the past affects our now. What we do in the now affects our future. We live in the now, we have to live in the now, but it's all a vast continuum. And now I find myself driving everybody crazy because I see time as so spacious. I see life as so spacious. And I
Yeah.
have Star Trek to thank for that. And you know what? I'm not ashamed. I'm glad it was there. And, that's why sometimes I get disappointed with what's happening now, because I'd like future generations to be able to have that chance to say, well, it's confusing in my actual world around me, but I can see it through Star Trek. And it's like a filter I can deal with. And it's engaging and it's interesting. And it's funny? The action adventure to me was pure sweet frosting to me. If it wasn't there, it wouldn't matter. I mean, there are some stuff like the motion picture. I love that movie, and everybody doesn't think there's a lot of action in it. But that's part of the reason why I'm attracted to it, because you spend most of the movie going through this long V'ger thing, and it's, obviously I'm not a drug user, so this is like a trip for me. It was like 2001. It was a trip for me, and again Spock having that connection with V'ger, so I'm into Star Trek for that kind of reason. I ended up gravitating more toward the esoteric element of it, and it affected me on that level. And of course, I craft things, and it inspires my imagination. And it even inspires who I became friends with, like you. So, I mean, if somebody's into Star Trek, I want to talk to that person if they're really into it. So it inspired me on a very social level. And in talking about just regular things in reality, I often quote Star Trek characters and episodes. Just a little funny aside. I just wanted to add this because it's just, I can't think of anywhere else I'll put it. You've been to Star Trek conventions before, right?
Oh yeah, been to many of them.
You were at the Bangor one in 91?
91. Nope, I was in the military
right,
then.
right, military. Sorry, I just forgot. But anyway, I was there in 91, and they had I wasn't there, but they had a contest, and they were asking all these technical questions, which they do. My mother doesn't know Star Trek technically. She wanted to go in there and try to win something. So they offered a paperback book, and it was called Prime Directive. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I don't know if I read it. It's been a while. I've been from the 80s and 90s and stuff like it's got lingering around here. So.
And here's the question they asked, and this is how I think I get interested in Star Trek too. They asked my mother, because she told me later. The question came up. In the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The Vengeance Factor, who was the Sovereign of Akamar 3? And she won that book. Because she remembered the name Maruk.
Yeah.
Nobody can remember this. They knew all the technical aspects of Klingon D7 or the whatever class ship, but they couldn't remember Sovereign Maruk. But she just seen that, and evidently that whole thing just had an impact on her, that character. Yeah. So she's thinking, "Oh, Maruk," and everybody's like, "You who?" They wouldn't think. So I always thought of things like that, and she won that book for me, just remembering that Maruk. I mean, I'm sure you go around asking a lot of Star Trek fans. They might know stuff that even I wouldn't, but Sovereign, I remember the episode of Sovereign Who? I mean, I don't think she comes up in casual conversation, but my mother remembered that. So,
I remember the actress that played her.
She was in a Rodney Dangerfield film. I can't remember the name of that. Ladybug. Was it Ladybugs?
What's that?
Was it Ladybug she was in? She was a coach?
I think so. I
it was one of those movies,
movie that my mother used to like watching all the time.
And I think there's a scene that impacted my mother because she had this big personality, and she was talking to these gatherers, and they were saying, "Oh, we only want what's ours," and she's like, "You only want what you can take." Maybe that's why she remembered that big theatrical moment, because I mean that really an impact on you. That big, like Shatner made these epic things. People say it's overacting, but they want a Horatio Hornblower, and he'd be banging on the floor saying, "This is our business." He was into it.
Yeah.
He was right into it. Picard made these Shakespearean speeches in heraldic poses with his head on high, while Q sat there just watching him and saying, "I love this." you know. But Kirk would be like, "Oh, you're gonna love it and you're gonna mean it," you know. He was deep into it, you know, and and you know, and then of course you come to Cisco, who's like, "Are we gonna do it or what?" He no nonsense with him, and you know, then you have Janeway, you know, Mr. Paris report, you know, that element of it, and Enterprise. They never developed Archer well enough for me. But the point is that, you know, I just have that experience with that whole Star Trek thing. Now, I'm sorry. This is a big subject, but I'm glad we're doing it. Maybe it goes in with the other one, but even though Star Trek right now is topsy-turvy, you know, even watching the old Star Treks or making up new ideas, what keeps you interested in Star Trek?
Well, what keeps me interested, you know, it's like I have favorite episodes from all the different series that's been made, you know, and when there's nothing on that, you know, that really interests me anymore, you know, or, you know, I'm just bored, you know, I can always click on, you know, because, you know, you got the internet's at your fingertips, you know, and I got this Roku box and I can just plug in any episode I want to watch, you know, and it's like, you know, I'm all of a sudden I'm right back to what, you know, binge watching like a whole bunch of episodes all in one night, you know.
Yeah,
you know?
I know what you mean. I mean, you know, when I go to bed and I've had a bad day, you know, it's going to be TNG. Sometimes Voyager, but usually TNG. Just like, honestly, it feels like an extended family. You know, and this may sound corny, but it really wasn't. Nobody in the theater did this. I wept terribly when Data got killed in Nemesis. Not because, oh, it's my favorite character. It felt like I was losing a brother. That may sound weird, but I got that close to these characters. And I've watched TV shows over the years, and I'm sure you have too. I mean, everybody goes through this where, well, not everybody, but I'm sure many people, where they watch a TV show when they're young and they love it. But when they grow up and they watch, they think, how could we ever have liked that? You know? I mean, we all go through that. With Star Trek, I watch it now, and especially Next Generation, and I think, I noticed something now I didn't notice before. You know, sometimes it's a funny thing, like you pointed out. I'm not going to say it again. You know what I was going to get at, but we know what we're talking about, right? So you pointed that out, but I just missed that. But now when I watch that, I think I can't watch Farpoint at night because I'm gonna.
Now you're on alert to hear it. Now you're just waiting for that word.
I'm holding it in because, like I said, whenever I can't watch Encounter at Farpoint because if I see that now when he says that, I'm like, because you know I'll be thinking of I never noticed that. You never do say that all the time. But anyway, no. But for the most part, I'll watch an episode and I'll say, boy, I didn't notice this point then. You know, I didn't notice this character doing this then. I didn't know this connection then. Sometimes I mistake audio and I hear it correctly later.
Yeah.
I told you about Picard in the first season where Patrick Stewart was for some reason trying to mix a pseudo halfway French accent into his dialogue, and sometimes things slurred. He in one episode, I can't recall which one, I could have sworn he said to Tasha Yar, Lieutenant Yar, you set your purse. What he said was, you stay at your post.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought that is because he was trying to mix French into his British accent, and it came out all muddled. And, you know, on the TV, you know how when you record on VHS, sometimes the audio goes out because the TV's having signal problems?
Yeah.
But when I watched the DVD, I could hear through the slurring, and I could hear what he was trying to say. Like, for years, I thought he asked her to set her purse. You know, so it's like, that doesn't make any sense. So, like I said, then you hear things. And not only that, you know, you watch more movies, you notice people in Star Trek you notice from other films, and, you know, things like that. And that's, you know, that's how Star Trek has basically impacted on me over the years, you know, in the sense that each time I watch it, I always notice something different, and it actually keeps getting better. And maybe it's turned me into a snob, because to be honest, my standards for Star Trek are not low. They're not low. And, you know, that's why I call this Trekprime.
Yeah.
I'm winking because, like I said, I'm not here to criticize, but yes, I did go to see the J.J. Abrams movies, but not with a clean slate. I wasn't comparing it. I knew it was going to be a different thing, but I'm thinking, okay, so they're going to do another timeline. But it's the quality that I'm all about.
Yeah.
I don't care what you jump off of. I don't care how many lens flares you put into your movie. I don't care about any of that. I just wanted to have that Star Trek flavor.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I wanted to taste like Star Trek. I think of Star Trek like really good, you know, gumbo. Everybody's gonna want some gumbo. So I
Yeah.
think of Star Trek like really good food that's gonna taste good. And
Yeah.
you know, and it keeps tasting better, you know. It's like if you're making cassoulet, it's always better in 2 days. And that's how I feel about Star Trek. It keeps being like really good cassoulet or like a fine wine. It
Yeah.
always has that effect that it just really gets better with age. And
Yeah.
you know, I wonder if, you know, younger people, if they binge watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, they're gonna say, do something like that. You know, I mean, if you really binge watch that and see what it is and live with it, you know,
Yeah.
and even TOS, even though TOS was my mom's thing before me, you know, my dad wasn't really per se into Star Trek. He watched it, but you know. Oh, and a little aside, how Star Trek impacted me. This is weird. Maybe this. I don't know if this happened to you. When I was in second, third grade, teachers would bring in things for some reason, catalogs, all the Star Wars stuff in them. Now I knew what Star Wars was. I mean, you know, who doesn't really? But um, they didn't know what Star Trek was. And I would think, you know, they would show me this stuff. They said, I thought you were really into Star Wars. And I'm saying, well, it's really Star Trek. I never seen Star Wars then, by the way. I
Yeah.
had never seen Star Wars when I was 7. I hadn't seen it yet. Don't know why. Maybe it was those horrible edits they'd put on TV in that time. There was one I saw where the dialogue was all chopped up and didn't make any sense. And I was later told by a friend who watched that syndicated version, yeah, it's like you even watch the show again after that. They butchered it on TV. Remember they edited for television movies?
Yeah.
Sometimes they got it right. Sometimes they did butcher jobs. Star Trek 3, they edited out the Badgers being destroyed. But
Yeah.
at least but apparently on New Hope, they just cut that at certain points to death. And, you know, usually in primetime slots where there may be young people watching, who knows what they did with Greedo and Han Solo. And I don't know what they did. I don't know if they have that in there. They may have cut that all out. But they cut all these key scenes out. So I'm glad I didn't get into Star Wars in a truncated edition. But anyway, the thing with Star Trek is that I would have to say to people, well, this is what Star Trek is. And it's a weird thing. You know, usually movies don't get that big. But, you know, Return of the Jedi wasn't that old. It was like 4 years old. Everybody was that was being really marketed. And Star Trek in the late 80s wasn't really being marketed, you know, in terms of toys all that much. There was still way more Star Wars stuff. I think even the Kenner line was still around. There was a lot of Star Wars stuff at that point. So it's just weird, you know, how there was still Star Wars stuff floating around. But the Star Trek stuff, we were kind of building it ourselves. But anyway, that's how Star Trek impacted on me with some side notes. Well, that's what kept me interested, I should say. We've done the impact. Yeah. That's what kept me interested. So is there anything you wanted to say about what Star Trek means to you other than what we already talked about and added on?
No, I know. I mean, I guess, you know, like I said, it's just, for me, it started off very subtly and it just grew as I got older. And when I got older and matured and stuff like that, I understood better what these messages were in the episodes, and it started to click with me at that point. Then I understood what real fans, you know, what they were saying about the show. Then I could understand, you know, the concepts behind the stories, and that's when I really started to appreciate the series as a whole.
And I find it interesting. Maybe it's weird that this happened. It happened to you when you were a little older. With me, it's funny how Star Trek impacted on me in a deeper level before I was 12 years old. You know, just through the Data character. And, you know, to be honest with you, I kind of remember when we moved where we are now. You know, it was way after Star Trek, The Next Generation was even over, but I said, I want to customize my room. I want to have something in my room, like a desk, that looks like that wood thing that Worf works.
Yeah.
That long wood thing. I thought that would just be really cool. But, you know, it lasted about 3 seconds. But, you know, I just thought it would be really fun. But no, You know, I mean, this could have gone into a real rabbit hole because Star Trek memories with us are so strong. And like I said, the fact that we were friends, that we met at one point, and that we didn't see each other for years, and now we reconnected again, and we're doing this blog.
Yeah.
To me, it's all over Star Trek. It brought all that together, you know,
Yeah.
and keeping us interested. So you could say that Star Trek has impacted on us together, and us having this conversation and bringing it out to the world. So
Yeah.
until next time, this has been Trekprime. You know, like I said, this is a lot of you have your own stories, and I
Yes.
wouldn't mind hearing them. So the comments are there, comment section's there. You know, no trolling now. I'm trying. I know it's hard to. I know it's hard out here to keep it away, but you know, try to keep it clean in there. But you know, add your stories, tell your stories, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye bye.